One and welcome once again to the Adventures Travel Club television show. We find ourselves in Norway, in Oslo, and we are back at the City Hall where we were looking at our last episode at these magnificent murals that we see on the walls here, and they are really something. And a lot of it, of course, depicts everyday life and some of the history of Norway itself. You know, Betty, we're going to take a look at those the Viking ships today, and learn that perhaps it was during the Bronze Age when men made started with the metal tools and things, is when they started with these ships. But we should mention too that before the days of the Viking, I mean, there were people in Norway, and of course a lot of these people were hunters and fisher people, and even the Stone Age folks way back when. But today we find ourselves at this particular point in the main chamber of the City Hall here, and so we can take a look and see what it looks like. It looks a little different than the City Hall in Fresno, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would think so. I think so.
It's really quite a beautiful place, and of course they had also a lot of the gifts and things that were given to some of the public officials were on display too. A lot of beautiful silver
looks like
things.
A church.
Doesn't it?
Yes,
Yeah,
it does.
Yeah, it's really quite nice, really quite lovely. And so if you were a member of the City Council, this is probably where you would be sitting in the Oslo City Hall. That is, if you were Norwegian.
If you were Norwegian. Other than that, you wouldn't be allowed. You wouldn't get invited, or
I don't
you wouldn't get
suppose
elected.
so. And that's the whole thing. Norway really had quite a history. I mean, part of Denmark and then part of Sweden, and they had quite a bit. In fact, what I was reading about was they wanted to have, when they broke away finally from Sweden, I think that was about 1905, they wanted a king. And so they got one of the princes from Norway who decided that he would be. They invited him to be the king, and so of course he became the king, and so now we have that.
What a way to get a king, really. Huh?
Yeah, go and borrow a prince from somewhere, huh?
Yeah. We don't have one right here now, but would you like to be our king for a
No,
day?
I don't think so. We have now come over to one of the islands there in Oslo, and as we are traveling along this island, we've mentioned before in one of the other programs that there are some museums, folk museums, and we're just passing one right here. In fact, it's a whole village that's back in here, and this is where the Viking Ship Museum is also located in this area, which we're driving up to right now. And a lot of people, of course, enjoying the wonderful sunshine.
It was nice
beautiful.
to have the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course, I'm a warm person myself. I like the sun rather than the cold.
That's why you wear a lot of sweaters, right?
I wear a lot of sweaters. I wear a hat.
And we're going to go inside the museum right now. And there are ships. There are two ships two of the main ships that we see here. And we should mention that this was how they were found. Now, these were actually burial ships. And you say, well, gee, why do they look all crunched up like that? It's because when they buried the person in the ship, they then loaded that with stones and made a great big berm over that, and of course that broke all of the timbers that was in the ship. But
I read about that. I read about their burial. You know, Marv, their customs of burying were very much like the Egyptians.
Mm-hmm.
If they weren't buried in the ship, in their boat, they were buried in the ground without a casket. But all of their worldly goods went with them because they too believed in the resurrection, that they would be living in Valhalla.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, not always, but they could be cremated too, and their wives would jump into the pyre just like in India and die with them because they wanted to be with them in the other life. And when they dug these places up, they found food, they found the remains of animals. So and it's so many of the customs, so many of the things that we know from one era are transported, and we find them almost a universal custom.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's true, and of course sometimes they would on some of the smaller ships. I guess it probably depended on your rank, I suspect, as to how you were going to be buried like that and burying underground. Because sometimes in some of the Viking tradition, of course, they put them on the ships and then they set the ships on fire and set them out into
they
the.
Went. Well, of course, and death wasn't a very bad thing for them because of their great belief in the hereafter, and they. They had a bad custom that, this is like we had seen in other areas that we went to. They did sacrifice humans
That was
their
back
gods.
back in the old
in the old times.
in the old
yeah,
times,
well,
right.
we're going back into the boat era.
Right,
So,
right.
and when they would go out to war, if they were having some difficulty, they would even have human sacrifices to their gods.
And
safe
Odin was
journey.
the main god, wasn't he?
And
at
Thor,
one
I
time?
think, was the god of thunder, the
Thunder and lightning and all that
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, the history does go back, and of course, then it changed quite a bit, especially when they were trying to bring Christianity into the country, and that's quite a tale in itself. And we'll talk about that at another time. But right now we want to focus on what they call the Augsburg find. And this was about 850 when the ship was built, they believe. Anyway, there was a woman that was buried here, and with her in the same grave, as Betty said, were dogs and horses and another female attendant. And the grave was desecrated. Couldn't say that, though.
I love that.
The robbers got into it, right? Yeah, and they took a lot of it out. But anyway, this ship was made of oak, and it's 22 meters long and 5 meters in width. And it took about 30 people to row it, and it had a square sail that was on the mast, and the mast, of course, was in the midship area. And here we get a chance to take a look at that. There were two main ships that were here in the museum. I got a chance to get up a little bit so that you could take a look down on this particular one here. But, it's amazing that they were able to put all of this back together. Of course, one of these ships was buried in what they call a blue clay, and so that's one of the reasons that it was able to, it stayed so long. And they found other ships in Sweden and some other ones in Denmark. The ones they found in Denmark actually had been sunk to keep another armada out. And
they couldn't get in. But
yeah.
that happened in Jerusalem too, where they found the ship boat that the sailors in Jesus' time used to go out fishing in, and that had been under the water for figure how long ago?
Couple thousand years,
2,000 years, and they were able to restore that. It's marvelous what they can do today.
I think it is. I marvel at the archaeologists who are able to go ahead and put these things back together again, or in a lot of the various digs around the various countries where we've been, and you see, they can tell so much. It just looks like a pile of dirt and rocks to me.
But Marv, you think about the workmanship that went into the building of these boats. I did see some pictures how they have to bend the wood and leave it in it. So like for here, what
like
do you
see
call
that there, yeah, right.
That took time. It took curing, that they had to prop it up on sticks in order to get that bend in it. Very, very ingenious, very clever people.
Well, and you see, they probably didn't have an awful lot of tools to work with, at least not the kind that we have today. But they were able. They made a lot of. They did make a lot of tools once iron and metals had been worked with there, and so it's just a mind blower, isn't it? Now, this other ship, the Kokstad, had a crew of 32 people, and they actually had a ship like this that went across over to the Chicago World's Fair.
That's a lot of people in the ship to be able to build one to hold 32 people. Sure helped with the rowing, though.
Yeah. Well, and the thing with these ships, they had to be sort of lightweight because they took them a lot of times overland. And they would go from river to river, like when they went into Russia. They oftentimes either had to use logs or turn the ship over and then carry the thing some way or another. I don't know how they carried it with that great big mast on it.
They used that for a domicile then, too. They would get underneath it and use that in the inclement weather.
So it was something, and it's interesting. We're talking about Russia because we know that they traveled all through Russia. In fact, Rus, I believe, was the Norse name for the Norsemen, and so that's sort of how Russia got its name, from what I understand. But to see that they were able to go clear down into what was then Arabia, and then sail into the New World. So these ships really had to be very sturdy.
Well, we think about the Vikings as a ferocious, fearsome tribe of people, but they really weren't. Some of them, of course, were warriors, but there were also explorers and settlers and traders.
Traders, big traders, right?
Yeah.
And this was also dug up. Now, this little wagon that you see right here, it had to go straight. It wouldn't turn. not it
Didn't
wouldn't
have-
turn sharply.
Okay.
But look what the condition that they put this back together in. It's just absolutely marvelous, isn't it?
Now, wheel was the greatest invention, supposedly, huh?
And look how that one was made.
Uh-huh,
Look how that one was made, how it was put together. That's really something. But anyway, it was well worth our time to go over to this museum and look at the carvings. You see that a lot of these, and of course the animals and the mythology that they had with the Old Norse religions, of course, came into play very, very much. And the thing about dragons, that mythology was all very much alive at that particular time as well. And here we see another sled. The runners that you see here, this was also dug up from one of the grave sites. And look at the intricate work that was done, all of that carving. Of course, when you have long winters like that, I guess you
They
could
need something.
sit around and whittle a bit, huh?
Makes me think a little bit of Russia, though, too, with the shape of it. But I don't know why. I guess because everybody in the north has to have a sled to get them from one place to the other when the weather can't get them any. Well, what else would they use? Their feet.
You could
and
use
shoes.
skis. Well, and you know what? But
And
the skis
skis.
were made, the early skis were made from the bones of animals, and they were strapped onto the people's feet.
The bones.
The bones from
Had to be
animals.
pretty big animals.
Yeah,
then,
it had to
huh?
be a pretty big animal. That's
Yeah.
right.
Well, it would be the tusks of maybe two of some of the sea.
If
No,
they
I guess
maybe
not.
if
No, I
maybe if
guess
you found
not.
a big one. But right now it's time for us to jump over to the Kon-Tiki and the Ra Museum. Ra?
Yeah, like hurrah.
Ra, right.
Hurrah.
These are the two ships that are in this particular museum, and they are very, very interesting. And you see a few of us are waiting to get in there. It was a pretty nice museum. They had a big display in there, and also a little motion picture that was going on that was taken as a part of the trip that they actually took, or the expedition, I guess is probably what we want to say. And this is what we're going to see is the Ra 2, and this sailed 3,200 miles in 57 days. And you can see what it's made out of here. This is made out of reeds, and these reeds came from Ethiopia. I'll tell you, Betty, I don't know. I really like to sail and do that, but when I looked at this vessel, I thought, no, I don't think I would want to be part of the crew.
Oh, it takes an adventuresome person to do something like this, and brave beyond words. Especially when you're dealing with the ocean, with all of its uncertainties, and where do you go? I
Right.
mean, either you make it or you're down. There's just man, I really appreciate the bravery of these people.
Well, I think if I remember correctly, I think these expeditions were made to prove that people migrated from Africa over to the New World as such. And we can see here's a cage for probably some of the livestock that they carried along with them. But again, I mean, this thing it just looked awkward. I mean, I'd never seen a reed vessel like that before,
Well, you wouldn't really have much reason to see one, but I was it tar? I know they used tar and moss to put together the vessels, the sailing ships.
I think the Vikings did that,
Did
but
they
I
do
don't know
that?
if these.
The
I think
Vikings
these
did
folks
that. What do
just
you
tied
think?
these together. I
Well,
think
they'd have to have, I would think they'd
The-
have to have some kind of a sealer.
I
don't know,
I don't. That's a good question. I really don't know. This must have been the cabin. I think if that's what you want to call it. Just to me, it looks like another cage.
Yeah,
But
Well, they had to have some kind of shelter from.
oh, sure.
Really, because they had some inclement weather along the way.
But you can imagine they're probably wet most of the time, don't you think
Well,
so?
When I saw this, I kind of thought about the Cubans coming over, the people from Havana coming over, to Florida, and they came in all kinds of makeshift things
Right,
too.
that's
so
true.
if you have the will, you can do just about anything.
I suspect so. And if this was the only material that they were using in Africa at the time for their boats, then I guess that's probably
Well,
what they, had to
Did
use.
they not dig out trees then too and have little canoes?
Well,
probably for small.
I would
areas,
suspect so.
huh?
But and you see here that the mast was was made out of wood, and they did have a fairly large sail on this one. But like you say, you had to be pretty adventuresome, I believe, to take a trip on this one. Now this, of course, is the Ra 2, and now we're going to look at the Kon-Tiki. And the Kon-Tiki was not built out of that, but was more of a lightweight wood that that it was made of. And unfortunately, I'm very sorry, but there was not very much light in this museum, so we can't see that too clearly. But again, you see the mats that were made.
I think it was balsa wood. You know, balsa wood so light, and if you ever just throw a piece of balsa wood when you were a kid in the water, you know,
see how it floats,
and you just it does float.
And we can see where they floated to. Look here from South America off to the Easter Islands, and this was one of the monolith. What do you call it? Well, it's statuary, I guess, or monolith. I'm not quite sure what the name of it is, but it was
it'd be a statue.
It'd be a statue, a big one,
a big one.
And this was not one of the biggest, but we do have some pictures of some of the other ones there.
Great history
off of Easter Island, and there we can see here, and look how they see. I mean, that's pretty big. Look how they dug that up, but that's really something. You know, I wonder if they know the. I wonder if they know the origins of this. I haven't read too much about Easter Island.
I think not. They're still working on that. It's one of those unknown. Why? It was sort of like Stonehenge. Stonehenge.
We're having some real tongue twisters today, aren't we?
I can't get my mouth around it right. When we went there, you know, they're still contemplating how it was built and where the rocks came from, and they had a good documentary on that not too long ago.
Well, this was interesting. So if you are on your way, stop by this museum if you're in Norway. I think this will be very, very interesting to you. And of course, there are many more things here, of course, in this museum to see. This was with the gentleman that I believe that led the expedition, and they had a movie going. I wanted to take a little bit of this, even though that's why you see the flicker, because I just had the video camera up to see what they had there, and they had actually taken a lot of pictures, and of course they were motion pictures that they were using in those days when they did the two expeditions. And we can see that the sea was, as you said, Betty, you know, it got a little bit inclement, I think, just on the regular thing. Yeah,
that kind of weather.
Yeah, and of course there's a big shark out here, and not that little one, but there's a great big one. And you just saw the back of it right there, and they were a little concerned about this. I
wonder why.
Well, I think I would have been a little concerned too. They thought that this was the biggest shark that they had ever seen, and I don't know. I've never gotten that close to a shark.
Imagine, I mean, they had no safety features there. I mean, if you fell off, you fell off, and
I think you probably had to tie a rope around you. You know, but it shows some of the crew here, and this is again the motion pictures that they made on these expeditions here, and well, we see a bird.
Noah.
Yeah.
He saw the bird run from the ark.
You probably felt like Noah if you were on this thing and spent that many days on it, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
101 days on that particular. Oh, and here we go. Now there we see some land off in the distance, and of course this also had to be very dangerous too, because with a ship like this, how are you going to navigate that if you've got rocks off of these islands and the reef? That's it could be just a little bit scary. So I have to take my hat off, if I wore one, to these adventurers, and at least they did make the trip, and they proved that those trips across the ocean could actually be made. Here we see a ship that I would probably go on. This one is being worked on right here. And as we see now, we are on an island, and we're across from the main part of the city of Oslo. And you can see there's a cruise ship in there. And if you look real closely, you'll be able to see the city hall that we saw just a little bit ago when we began the program with. It's off in the distance there. And
say when.
Say when? Oh, when we see the city hall? Okay, I will. Maybe we passed it already.
You
don't see it already?
No.
Okay.
Well, I see, all right. But, I mean, for me to pick out a city hall with all the other buildings, forget it.
And remember, the city hall was set right there on the bay, because there were those big old sailing ships that were out there, and those you can go ahead and charter. It was in the earlier part of this. So
that's very beautiful.
Well, people coming into Scandinavia on SAS right there, and then some people also wanted to sail in on the Princess Line, as we can see right here. So this is really a very, very busy port in Oslo, and just very, very beautiful. Again, all of these wonderful islands that we see that make up the whole region here of the southern part of Norway is just really quite beautiful. Well, we're going to do a little change of pace right now because I told you that, I had relatives in Norway, and so I was invited over. Had to take a train from the main station, which we have seen several times, and I went out to visit my cousins, and they're going to be treated to a Norwegian dinner. So let's join that. Now, Carol, you're going to show me how to do this Norwegian dish, right? You
Right.
took two.
And I said that when you're working, when you're just getting together as a family or something, then the housewife doesn't peel the potatoes. Each person has to peel the potatoes that they're going to eat. And then, of course, you said, yes, but what if I like the skins on the potatoes? And I said, yes, right now they are new potatoes, so it's perfectly all right to eat the skins.
Good.
So that's what we have decided to do, I see.
Okay.
Okay, and then for this particular dish, we mash the potatoes a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect, of course, but somewhat. And then we take this meat, ground up meat, and put it on the potatoes. And then we will mix it up real nicely because it tastes so good. It has lots of spices in it.
What kind of spices did you use?
I don't know. I just buy it from the store. I'm cheating a little.
Okay, all right.
I'm cheating. And then we take tyttebær, which is sort of like cranberries. It has about the same taste as cranberries, but these are very small berries that are found in the woods.
How do you pronounce them again?
Tyttebær.
How would you spell it?
Tytteb, and then an A and an E put together, and an R.
Okay.
Because the Norwegians have 3 extra letters in their alphabet. So, and then we just sort of eat it that way or mix it up a little. I like to mix it up so that I have the same taste the whole time. And then I have taken some cabbage because cabbage is quite common in this country. And then let's eat. And then when we get through eating this part, then I do have a Norwegian dessert. And we can talk about that.
Wonderful.
When we come that far.
I think so. Carol, what was the main course this evening?
The main course is called lungemos, and it means mashed lungs. So you have been eating lungs, and then what I see on the packages that they've also mixed up heart and tongue of the animal. And this is the pig.
It's very good.
Yeah?
It's very good.
I love it.
Now, what is for dessert?
Okay, for dessert it's called riskrem. And first you cook the rice, the white rice, for almost 2 hours. You start out by cooking it with just water to make it not so hard. And then you fill in with milk and more milk and more milk, and just let it cook very, very, very slowly. After that, then you get sort of a pudding out of it, and then you take some of the pudding and then you mix it up with whipped cream. And that's what you see here. And then we serve it with a red sauce. Yeah, it might be based on raspberry or cherry, maybe strawberry. Maybe a combination of a few things.
And it's called what again?
Riskrem.
How would you spell that?
R-I-S-K-R-E-M.
Good. Let's try it.
Okay, I was saying that Martinius was the first mayor of Kingsburg.
Right.
And the article that my dad got, probably from your mother, says that he had 5 children. And I have a picture of him and his wife with four children. So I don't know what's right. But all I knew of names was Raymond and Adele. Now I've written child, so that we have a place to write information.
Yeah, because those I don't know about.
No, and then you said that Raymond and Ruth had 2 boys. Whereas I had Claire with an E, and I thought it was a girl. And then Raymond and Winfield and Alvin, and then you come up with Everett.
And that's part of the genealogy from Norway and Sweden, and it happened to be the first mayor of Kingsburg. I thought that was kind of interesting in that in the family line there.
So, Mon Mon. There are only two people who are awake, obviously. Let's do it again. Mon Mon. Oh, good. Wonderful. We're going to have one of the most spectacular days today. The next 3 days, actually, are probably the most spectacular of the whole tour, scenery-wise. Because we are going to head now from the east of Norway, sheer across country, going across the huge mountain plateau, the Hardangervidda, and towards the west coast. And this is spectacular. So look forward to it. You probably will be falling asleep as we go along, and that's all right. The motion of the bus and all that, I do realize that, but be prepared for some beautiful sights today. Our first stop will be at the glasswork factory, the Hardeland Glass Works. You saw some of their chandeliers yesterday at the town hall. So we'll make a little stop. We'll make a stop there, and then we'll continue on through the Halling Valley and across the Hardangervidda and to the spectacular Stalheim Hotel tonight. We have a short cruise on a fjord. It's a very, very short cruise. It's a 10-15 minute cruise only, but tomorrow, no, not even tomorrow, but the next day, when we leave the Stalheim Hotel to go to the Baito Hotel, you will be cruising for 3 hours on a finger of the Sognefjord, the largest, deepest fjord in Norway. Look forward to that too. Actually, you can look forward to the whole of the trip, because we do have spectacular sights ahead of us.
And we told you earlier that we do go through a lot of tunnels trying to get out of the area there, out of the city, and there's a lot of underground tunnels, of course, because you've got so much water on top, and you have so many islands. And we're going to find out now about the country itself.
I think it's 1,054 miles long from south to north, with more than 24,000 miles of coastline. It's the 5th largest country in Europe if we look at the size of the country, not the size of the population, because there are only 4.5 million people altogether in Norway. Not that many. At the schools, it is so that you have to have a certain amount of the lessons in nynorsk in all of the schools, but some schools have that as their main Norwegian language and just do some of the lessons in bokmål. In all of the 3 Scandinavian countries, we learn each other's languages at school. We have to take a certain amount of lessons when we have our national language lessons.
And we'll be finding out much more about Norway and also Sweden and other programs. But it's time for us to say goodbye, so we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.